Chapter 19 is rule structure of CSS. Now, this is basically the format of this div UL line. This is the format of cascading style sheets. And you've seen a part of this when we've done previous assignments, and those were actually called inline cascading style sheets. And you'll see in a little bit that there are three different types. There's inline, internal, and external. But this is basically the way they look. They're just in different places. So you have to know the different names of the different parts for the quiz. So the part before the curly braces, see that there's curly braces at the beginning and at the end. The part before it is called the selector, which would be either a div or a UL or, some other name that you create. That would be the selector. Then there's a declaration that's separated by a colon. The first thing is a property, and the second thing is the value. And notice how in this particular cascading style sheet selector, there's two declarations. There's two of them that have a property and a value. Now the property is something that's given. It's actually something like there's a list of things that you can change about the content of your page. And those are specific. You can't, it's not something that you can create on your own. So you basically just have to look up from the list what your options are. And then there are certain values that you can put on each one. So height would be a certain value. And then background would be, colors. And then you can do hex, you can use RGB, whatever options for that value. So that's generally how it looks like. And there's different variations of how it could look, specifically spacing, but this is generally how it's going to look. Okay, so again, just be sure that you know that, they're surrounded by curly braces after the selector. They're separated by colons instead of equal signs. And also know that you can use something like an unordered list as a selector or a div that you added in your code. But you can also just know that you can also create something. You can name it yourself. Okay, now there are two different types. There's classes and then there's IDs. The difference between the two is that, well, there's a couple of differences. Classes specifically, you would have the same selector type. So that means that a class, it's going to be applied to all of the unordered lists or all of the paragraphs or all of something that you have in your page. And when it comes to IDs, it's only going to be one particular item. So it's only going to be one unordered list or one paragraph. So that one's more specific. And you'll see that it is an ID if it has a pound sign. On the classes, there's a period instead. Okay, so there are classes and IDs. And if you really think about it, if you think of class, that's going to be a bunch of people and an actual class. And then an ID, like your driver's license, would represent just you individually. So that's a good way to remember how to separate them. Okay. So in this class, what we're going to do is we're going to put our rules in the head tags of your file. So if you see here, here's a basic shell of a page. I have my head tags. It's going to be inside of here. So we're actually going to put, like underneath title, we're going to put style. And then we're going to put some space and then the close style tags. And then inside, we're going to put our CSS. Now, this is actually the internal type of cascading style sheets when it's inside the head on the page. Okay. Okay, so here's a couple of examples. Uh, and basically here's the, the style tags like I just mentioned, but inside the style tags, you would have something like this. Like, remember I showed you earlier when we were explaining the parts, it's all on one line, but you can also do it many different ways. The spacing thing, you can have, how they actually put, they pressed enter after the first curly brace, and then they have an enter after the line of code before the curly brace. Either of them will work. The only thing I would say is that if you know that you're only going to have one style, then you can just put it in one line. But if you have many different styles listed, it's going to be easier to read if you actually have it listed going down. So, but either of them are fine. Just know that, just remember that, just with HTML, we're indenting, we're pressing enter to make it look good for us or make it easier to read. But, it's still going to ignore the white space. So even if you were to press enter, the document doesn't know that, the browser doesn't care. So it's okay to do the white space specifically for now because, we're just starting and I would like it easier to read. But just know also that the white space does matter when it comes to loading times. So when your users are looking at or loading the web page, if it has to read a bunch of white space, then that is going to increase loading time. And there is ways to reduce the size after you've done your style sheets. So, but that's a future information. Okay, and know also that there's different ways of doing code. Like you can assign, earlier we had an unordered list here, a UL. So everything that is an unordered list is going to have basically, if you were to do list style type none, you're actually getting rid of the bullets from your unordered list. And this is assigned to an unordered list. But if you look down here, it says P dot before. That's actually for paragraph if you want something done before a paragraph. Or you might want to do something on every link. You're going to put the A, just like you would here. UL, you're doing it for all of the unordered lists. Okay. I mentioned earlier that we're in this class, we're adding everything in the head of our page, and that's called the internal style sheet because it's on the same page. Then we also have external style sheets where there's an actual second file that you would actually need to put somewhere on your site that has the style sheets. So this is something, this is what a style sheet might look like, So we have everything in the body is going to be light blue, paragraph, it's going to be, with these qualities. But so this is the external style sheet where it's on a different file. But if I were to put this cascading style sheet assignments in the head tags of a file, then that would make it an internal style sheet. So yeah, internal and external. External is outside of the page, internal is inside the page. Okay, and external, and the reason we would do external is because you can make a change that'll apply to one or more pages. So if you have a website and all the backgrounds are light blue, instead of going to each individual page and changing the background, you could apply it using the external sheet, and it'll apply it to all of your pages all at once, instead of doing it one by one. So that's very important to know. Now I'm going to cover inline in just a second, but to continue with external style sheets, here's how it says the CSS extension. And if I click on this one, you see on the top how it says it's called new1.css. So that is the cascading style sheet. It has to be .css. That's the extension that it needs. And then this line here would need to be in the head of your web page. So if this style sheet was going to be tied to this page, then in the head, and let me just put it underneath the title. In the head, you would need this line, but then you would need to change the file name to new1.css. I think I have a space there. But the spaces are kind of bad when it comes to file names on web pages, so I would actually recommend not doing a space. But anyway, so this is how the web page knows to call another style sheet for the information for the page. So here we're calling in the external. Here we actually have internal. And then the last one is inline. Okay, so inline, let me go ahead and talk about it here. Skip that part for a little bit. Inline styles, you're actually going to put it inside the line. And so that makes sense, it's in the line. So basically the style is actually going to be in here. So if I were to do, now let's say I have paragraph color is navy here. And then here, paragraph color navy here. Well, if you have it in line, you're actually going to put paragraph and then style equals color navy here. And then you'd have your text and then the closed paragraph there. And let me go ahead and just move this over a bit. So you see that it's P style and then color and then whatever you want. So this page that I have here actually has all three. It has the external, it has the internal, and then it has in the actual line. Those are the three different types. So just a bit of a history lesson. Previously, when cell phones became popular in viewing web pages, well, they had to figure out a way to create a site that would fit on that cell phone. And so I mentioned before, responsive. So you change the size of the browser, and then the web page still looks okay. The text isn't very tiny. But before responsive, they would actually create entirely different sites, and they would start with the M. So instead of just google.com, it would be, instead of www.google.com, it would be m.google.com. And that's a completely different site. So you're basically doing the work twice. You're doing everything twice. So responsive is really great. And we use responsive for with cascading style sheets, and we'll cover that next week. Okay, so I covered the inline part. Know that if you use the star character, that would apply to everything. So instead of putting like UL or paragraph before the curly braces, you could just put star and then color equals blue, and then all the font would be blue. Or you can actually say a footer star, and everything in the footer would be the color blue. So just know that the star or the asterisk, just like you would in many different places, like if you were to search for files or search through files like on your hard drive, you would just do a search and do star. I mean, of course you can type in a name, lab, Okay, so here's everything that has lab, but if I did a star.css, now I'm searching for everything that I have in there that has CSS as the extension. So, so star is generally the same way. Everything color equals blue. Everything in the footer color equals blue, that kind of thing. Okay. Oh yeah. But it really should be avoided because because basically you're making the computer examine everything to see if it needs to format the content. So that's really not recommended, but it's just possible. Okay, so here is a part that we're actually going to start doing code, really. So these are two unordered lists, and they're just regular unordered lists. So you see on the right hand side, those are two regular unordered lists. They have the bullets and they're listed. Okay, great. But notice how you don't need the divs. You just have the ULs, but they actually added the divs to actually assign a certain cascading style sheet to it. So here's ID equals to do, ID equals completed. So if I scroll down a bit, we have to do and then we have completed. To do, they wanted the background color to be red, completed background color equals green. So here it is. So that's basically all they needed to do to add the cascading style sheets. The unordered list is exactly the same. They just added the div around it, and then they marked it as whatever sheet. So, so yeah, and that's pretty much all they had to do. And notice how there's a pound sign. So what type of style sheet is it? Is it the ID, or is it the class? Which do you remember it is? Okay, it is actually ID because ID has the pound sign. If it's classes, it'll have the period. So if let me actually have both here. See how it has a div and then ID equals, and I copied the to do. So I'm actually going to put to do here. Then I'm going to close the div, and indenting is great. So I have the to do up here, and it's on a P, but that's still fine. If I do a save and refresh, let's see what happens. I had to call CSS class 2. So now it's highlighted in red. And let me go ahead and make it smaller so you can see both. So here we have, now let's say I call this banana. So the actual cascading style sheet is called banana, but I have the div ID as to do. Will it still work? No, it will not. So basically, it has to be consistent. So if you have this called banana, then this needs to be banana. There it is. It is it has a style sheet with the div. Now, also know that I have it in a P tag, and I'm actually going to go ahead and cut that out. And then I'm going to put an unordered list there real quick. That's not all you need for an unordered list. We need list item, and then we need, actually put in the same line. Okay, so there's an unordered list. So now we save and refresh. And now we have an unordered list. So this div, basically anything inside of it will have that red background. Let me go ahead and put the paragraph in there. Save and refresh, and now all of that is in there. And I have the paragraph twice. So you see that anything inside of that div is going to be formatted with the ID that I have as banana. Okay, so not too bad, right? Okay, so let me go ahead and now this right here basically explains that. Remember that ID is only once on each page. So let's say you had multiple unordered lists and you wanted to apply it to that. Well, you couldn't actually do that. So let's say, of course, you could just have two unordered lists in this div. Just know that there are so many different options. Even, you know, just like I said, ID and class, you can use either one, but, you know, sometimes just some things are better than others at the time. So if I were to put two unordered lists, it's still in the div. So both of them are still going to be with the red background. So save and refresh, they're still going to be in the red background. But let's say you wanted the unordered list in a different div, then that would be, it would only apply to that very first one. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that there. I'm going to get rid of the paragraph just so that it doesn't look too crowded. So now I have a div, and let's get rid of one of the unordered lists. And then I have the other unordered list by itself outside of the div. So I save and refresh, and now only one of them because it has the ID of banana. So, but let's say you wanted it to be applied to all unordered lists. Well, there's a different way of doing that. Okay, so we only want ID once, and we want classes. If you want something to be applied to multiple places, then you want to use a class. So it is actually pretty easy to change it from a cascading style sheet to an ID, or from an ID to make it a class. And we really just need to get rid of the pound sign or hashtag and change it into a period. So if you look down here, the to do and completed IDs are, they don't have the pound sign anymore. They have periods. And then notice how they still have IDs, but they've actually named each one of the unordered lists with different IDs. But the classes can actually be the same. So these are different things, but then we want these two to have the same properties. And then we want class to have a different property. But also know, and notice also that you can have both ID and class. And the reason for that is because, well, maybe you want, would like in this situation here, they wanted the lists to have the same background, but maybe something about the today or the tomorrow needs to be different. So they assigned both an ID and a class. So let me go ahead and show you that. Let's say, okay, we had banana. So if I just do a period and then banana, and instead of making the ID, let me just call it something else, because at this point, since I changed it into a class, there's really no ID up here. So I'm just going to do a test. Or, oh yeah, just hit test, not to make it complicated. Okay, and then I put class equals, and then banana. So now we only have it in the first, or just in the div. So it's just going to be the first unordered list. So let me go ahead and save. And actually it's going to be the same. So I'm actually going to put something different just to see the difference. But still notice that it is still going to work. So now the background is green. So I really just changed the ID type to a class type by removing the pound sign and putting a period. Okay, so let's say I wanted to put, I wanted to make both of them with the same class but different IDs. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste it. I'm going to give this unordered list a div and then a close div. So now we want, let me say that the background is still going to stay the same color, and I'm going to make it yellow again just because it's a better, or it's a better color to see. And then since IDs always have to be unique, I'm going to make this one, let's just say test 2, or I wanted to make it obvious, so I'm going to put obvious. So now these are two divs, two different IDs, but the same class. So they're both going to be with this particular assignment. So if I save and then refresh, now they both have the same background. So actually, let me go ahead and change this into a ID, but this one I'm going to name it just test. So it's just going to be on the first one, and notice how the color is going to change and then the margin's going to change. And let me make this obvious. So I'm going to make it red. And then if I save and refresh, see how it's changed to red, and it has a margin, and it's only to the one that has ID. So notice this particular unordered list not only has the class or background of banana, but it also has the properties that are in the test ID cascading style sheet. And there's just so many variations of how you can do things, but just know that there's options.